Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today we're talking mock draft. I came across a really interesting mock draft for the Giants with the 11th overall pick, and I figured I wanted to share it with you guys. It was from Benjamin Solak from the NFL Draft Network, and it was really interesting because he decided to go a totally different routes with this 11th overall pick. You know, a lot of us want to go offensive, whether it's Kyle Pitts, Devonta Smith, if he drops that far, Jamar Chase, if the football gods are so gracious. And, of course, you have Kyle Pitts, and then you have Jalen Waddle. Those two guys might be on the board for the Giants. Really great considerations. There's a lot of really phenomenal offensive talent in the first 15 to 20 picks. And then it becomes a little bit more, meshed up with defensive and offensive. But for the most part, we're looking offensive. The Giants' offense ranked 31st in the NFL this past year, 17.5 points per game, just unacceptable. Of course, you get Saquon Barkley back. Maybe they find a wide receiver in free agency that they can add. There's a lot of moving parts here this offseason. Obviously, free agency is going to be a big determining factor for the draft. But before we dive into this interesting scenario, Anthony, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm pretty curious about this scenario that you brought to my attention. A lot of Giants fans are assuming the team is going to go round one offense and then maybe just switch it up with defense or maybe continue to stack the offense of round two. That makes a lot of sense. Dave Gettleman promised he's going to add offensive playmakers, so a lot of fans take that and they say, okay, so the Giants are going to target an offensive playmaker in round one. Well, if they get one in free agency, they don't necessarily have to. Then they can get creative in round one of the NFL draft. So let's say, for example, they sign Kenny Golladay or Corey Davis or somebody like that in free agency. Well, then they don't have to go with an offensive playmaker in round one. There's a lot of really solid offensive playmakers, wide receivers that you could find in round two if you want to get another piece to complement a Kenny Golladay or a Corey Davis. So in round one, the Giants, depending on what they do in free agency, might have a lot of options, including going with a cornerback or maybe an edge rusher, cornerback, defense. Just going with the defense. Maybe they could bulk up the offensive line. A lot of options on the table for round one. It's all about how free agency shapes out, and we'll see what happens there. But I think this scenario that you brought to the attention is pretty interesting because they don't go offense here, and I'll let you touch on where they actually decide to go in this mock draft.
Yeah. So before we dive into the draft pick for the Giants, I do want to list off, the ones before. Obviously, number one overall, you have the Jaguars taking Trevor Lawrence. This is obvious. Everyone thinks they're going to go Trevor Lawrence. He's the generational quarterback prospect. You have the New York Jets. They go Justin Fields at Ohio State. So they get their quarterback, two quarterbacks right off the board. Then you have the San Francisco 49ers. They go quarterback two with Zach Wilson. So first three picks right off the board are quarterbacks. Really interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if that actually happened. So that's a really, really curious situation. I think the 49ers trade up with the Miami Dolphins in this scenario. But then you have the Atlanta Falcons who go offensive tackle, Rashawn Slater from Northwestern. Really interesting there. I thought he was going to be a little bit later of a pick, but they decided to go offensive tackle. Then you have the Bengals who go Penei Sewell. And that's really interesting because I feel like Sewell's a way better prospect than Slater. So this is already kind of an interesting draft scenario, that he would actually go above Penei Sewell, who's considered arguably a generational talent at offensive tackle. Then you have the Eagles. They go Jamar Chase. Everyone thinks they're going to go wide receiver. Jamar Chase is definitely a very talented player, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did go that route. Now you have the Lions at number 7, Jalen Waddle. And Waddle is a player the Giants are also really intrigued by, and I think that they could easily go with that route. It would make a lot of sense for them. Then they have the Chicago Bears at number 8. They take Trey Lance, quarterback out of North Dakota State, at number 9. Broncos take Gregory Rousseau. I thought he might drop a little bit farther than that, but they have him going out of Miami to the Broncos in Denver. Really interesting selection there. Then 2 back-to-back cornerbacks, right? So the Cowboys have the 10th pick. They go with Patrick Surtain out of Alabama. Really, really interesting there because Patrick Surtain is another player who, could be back and forth between Caleb Farley. I've seen them mocked, right before one another, after one another. It's really interesting to see where those two guys will land as the top 2 cornerbacks in the draft. And then you have the Giants who go with Caleb Farley at cornerback. That's the most interesting part of this mock draft, Anthony. What do you think about taking Caleb Farley? Would you be okay with that?
I think Caleb Farley is a really interesting selection here. As I've said, it's very dependent on what the Giants do in free agency. I might not really be excited about Caleb Farley over a wide receiver prospect or maybe a Kyle Pitts or something else. It's so dependent on what the Giants do in free agency. If I'm reading this correctly, this mock draft, Micah Parsons is still on the board at that point at 11 for the Giants. That would be a tough sell for me to be okay with Micah Parsons just staying on the board while we take Caleb Farley. That might be tough for me to agree with. And then Devontae Smith in this mock draft goes 12th to the Dolphins, so that's also very interesting. Maybe you're assuming, or Benjamin Solak is assuming, that the Giants do land a guy like Kenny Golladay in free agency, and that's why they end up taking a corner with the 11th overall pick. Now, I think what's honestly more likely to happen to me, I think this is interesting. I'll talk about Caleb Farley in a second. But personally, with this mock draft, I think what's more likely to happen is the Giants would actually get a veteran cornerback too in free agency on a cheap deal, a veteran guy who knows how to play at least at an average level at this stage in his career. Think somebody like a Joe Hayden. He stepped in, signed this pretty cheap veteran deal with the Steelers, went on to play really well, actually played well above average for the first season he was there at least. And then I think that's a more likely scenario for the Giants. And then in round 1 of the NFL draft, then they actually take a wide receiver or offensive playmaker or something of that caliber, because I don't think the Giants are actually in the position to spend a lot of money on a wide receiver right now. You take a look at the cap space, you take a look at the players that they have as impending free agents and what they're going to have to do to retain those players. Now, that might really eat up a lot of cap space before free agency even begins, and that might make it really difficult for the Giants to actually sign a wide receiver. I understand the report has said that the Giants are $3 million over the cap, but they have plenty of moves to make to get under the cap. I'm fully aware of that, but I still think that it's considered difficult if you have to cut 5 to 6 players to get under the cap and get enough money to sign one player. If you have to cut 6 players to sign one player, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to do, and it might not be the easiest thing for Dave Gettleman to pull off. And I don't have the utmost faith in Dave Gettleman, so I don't think he would pull that off. That's just my opinion. You might have the faith in him, and I respect that opinion. But, all right, so now let's talk about Caleb Farley. I think Caleb Farley is actually really interesting when you read up on him, because athletically and physically, he's kind of phenomenal. He's like 6'2", 207 pounds, and he apparently told people in like his freshman year of college or something, this is what I read, that he ran a 4.25 second 40-yard dash time, but nobody believed him, so he just said he ran a 4.35. So I guess it'll be interesting since there's no combine, no official combine this year. I guess there will be pro days. We usually don't use pro day 40 times anyway, because sometimes they're skewed and sometimes they're not as objective. There's a little bias to them. But I guess at his pro day, we'll see what he runs. Maybe he'll run that 4.35. Maybe he'll run a 4.2 something. That might shoot him up draft boards. That might put him as the number 1 corner in this class. If he's able to test physically really well at his pro day, it might make him a lot more appealing to NFL scouts. Because the thing with Caleb Farley is he's kind of a project in general. So when you want a project, you want the guy with the best physical traits and the most athleticism, and then you mold him into a more refined technical football player. Caleb Farley technically has not played a lot of press man coverage in college, as Alex is going to get into, I'm sure. But the thing with that is he's projected to be a press man corner, but he just didn't play a lot of press man coverage. So that's interesting, because all that is saying is that the tools are pointing towards him being an excellent press man coverage because of his size, his athleticism, the speed, all of those physical tools that can't be taught. That's why he looks like he might be a great press man corner in the NFL, but we haven't seen him do it. But I think that if he's able to have a really solid pro day and prove to NFL scouts that he's able to be molded into an elite press man corner, it might shoot him up the draft boards, and you could see him go as early as 11. I think that's possible. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's in the realm of possibilities, depending on what he does at his pro day.
Yes, that's exactly right. He's an athletically gifted player, and he played quarterback in high school, so I really like the perspective that he has at the cornerback position, understanding timing routes and different route concepts and being able to break on the ball. He's a very intriguing prospect for one major reason. He has the athletic attributes to be an elite man coverage corner. He played primarily zone with Virginia Tech, but it was super interesting to see all these people saying, he's an amazing man press corner, this and that. And the reality is he's only played 58 snaps in his career at Virginia Tech as a man coverage corner. So the sample size is so small, but the reason that people really like him in that role is because he has amazing makeup speed. So on those go routes, those deep balls, he has the size not only to control and dominate against big receivers, guys like maybe DK Metcalf. He can actually do really well against those guys, but especially the speed guys that try to push the field. Like let's say Darius Slayton, his primary route is go route down the field. He has great makeup speed. Let's say sometimes he gets beat off the line of scrimmage pretty easily, but he has such elite speed that he can catch up and actually turn those long balls into turnovers. He had 6 interceptions over 2 years with Virginia Tech. So he has really, really good ball skills, really good at turning the ball over, and he just has fantastic makeup speed, which can actually throw quarterbacks off because they're like, oh, I'm getting a dime. I'm throwing a dime downfield. Easy touchdown. He'll, like Anthony said, has 4.3 40-yard dash speed. He will bolt it down the field, turn his head around, and pick balls off. We see it over and over again. I'll throw a couple clips in there so you guys can see in the YouTube. But he's a very, very intriguing prospect for many different reasons, that being one of them. But I really do like his physical traits. That is what everyone is looking at. I actually don't think picking him at 11 would be the best idea, simply because I don't see him as a ready-made talent. He doesn't have that much experience as a collegiate player. He doesn't have that much experience as a man coverage player. And that kind of concerns me because at 11, there's going to be a player that falls from the top 10 to that spot at 11, and you want to take a guy who is ready-made, best player available, that's going to make an impact right away, and not somebody that you're going to need to spend a year developing. I think Caleb Farley is going to need a whole year of NFL experience before he takes that next significant jump to being a great corner. That's kind of how I feel about him. What do you think?
I have a good counterpoint to that. Caleb Farley, yes, I agree. Maybe he's not going to be the best player available, and he's not a ready-made talent at 11 overall, right? But he doesn't necessarily need to be with the Giants. In this defense, he would be playing cornerback too, replacing Isaac Yiadom, Ryan Lewis, or whoever you want to say is the starter in that revolving door at CB2 right now. CB1 is James Bradberry. He's going to still continue to shadow the other team's top opposing wide receiver, and he'll continue to do a great job. And then number 2, that's where we ran into a lot of trouble this year, was that CB2 position. But if we can get this guy who might struggle early on and just learn the ropes, but then eventually pan out to become an elite cornerback, well, then you might be able to pair James Bradberry, an elite man coverage cornerback, with Caleb Farley, another elite man coverage cornerback, if he's able to be molded into that. And he doesn't have to be that instantly. He can just work towards that and start off with a nice foundation and then just mold him. Another thing I'll say is, yes, he played a lot of zone in college. The Giants had a very, very interesting defense this year, where some games they ran a lot of man, other games they ran a lot of zone, but mostly they were just kind of disguising their coverages all the time and switching it up. And so having a guy who has that versatility, maybe he's not that man cover corner yet, but if that's what they want to mold him into, having him already having a solid, base foundation of zone coverage skills and then combining that with refined man coverage skills might make him a perfect fit in Patrick Graham's scheme. So in terms of being the best player available at 11, it's not very likely. I think there's going to be some really talented guys at 11. Micah Parsons is one of them if you look at this mock draft. Micah Parsons was there. I would probably take Micah Parsons over Caleb Farley. But what if the Giants decide to trade down to about pick 17 and Caleb Farley's still on the board? Then you might be talking about the best player available.
That's more interesting.
He really does have elite traits. I think that Caleb Farley, very interesting to see him mocked to the Giants at 11, but more realistically, in my head at least, he's a very realistic and very strong trade-down candidate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of people said that he would have been the number 2 corner on the board last year if he stayed and he went to the NFL draft. Instead, he decided to, postpone. He ended up opting out of the 2020 year. And the reason I think he opted out is because he was scared of injury primarily. Obviously, COVID is a serious concern. He might have actually just done it because of that concern alone. But he has actually a pretty bad injury history. He's had a few significant injuries that required surgery, so that's another con on the table that you have to consider. Cornerbacks oftentimes, quick, twitchy athletes, they pull things all the time. They get injured. They're not big guys, so if they try to lay a big hit, they can break bones. They're not meant to be big hitters. Now, the other thing that's a big con when it comes to Caleb Farley is he is a terrible, terrible tackler. The guy missed 21 tackles of 80 attempts last year, or in 2019, which is really, really bad. So he tends to, whiff, just completely whiff on tackles a lot. And it's not because he's trying to cause turnovers. He just isn't a good tackler. He takes bad angles. And he goes for the legs and he just misses because, when you have speedier receivers, they're going to get out of those tackles. So that's a major con. He'll need to improve that tackling technique. But those are all fundamentalistic things. You can improve your tackling technique. He has the physical traits and attributes to be a phenomenal player. It's just I see too many holes in his game for the Giants to take him at 11, and I don't trust his injury history. I don't trust having no game tape, no film to watch this past year. And I just don't trust the fact that he's played so little snaps in man coverage, and people are mocking him as an elite man coverage corner. I see the hype. I get the hype. I get why he's being mocked so high. But I just don't see the Giants taking a risk on a player who isn't ready to make an impact now. But to counter your point before, like you said, the Giants don't need him to be a top corner because they have James Bradberry. My argument against that would be they have to play the NFC East twice, each team. That means playing against CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup twice. That means playing, I mean, maybe not Terry McLaurin, but I imagine Washington might try to add a wide receiver to help whatever quarterback they bring in. Aside from Terry McLaurin, they had that guy Sims, who was pretty good. And then you have the Eagles, who are being mocked Jamar Chase. So if they have Jalen Reagor and Jamar Chase, you have two top-end wide receivers that you're going to need two cornerbacks to hold those guys down, right? So that's kind of my argument against that. And then you have other teams that are bolstered with wide receivers, right?
And then I'll counterpoint your counterpoint. Right? The guys that you mentioned are very young. If we're talking about Jamar Chase or Jalen Reagor, those are young guys who are still growing in this league as well. So they'll grow, and iron sharpens iron pretty much. That's my perspective on that. And even CeeDee Lamb, yeah, I expect him to make an even bigger jump in year 2. He was very good in year 1. But still, he's young. He's still learning. I think that might be kind of that iron sharpens iron situation where you have a young guy learning how to be a press man coverage corner. And then you have a young wide receiver who's learning how to be dominant in the NFL because he has the physical tools and traits to do it, right? It's kind of the same thing. It's like, basically, it's like Caleb Farley versus Caleb Farley in a way, right? It's like he's just learning how to defend players, and these players are learning how to break defenses. So that's my counterpoint to your counterpoint, but you do make a good point there. The Giants, yeah, I just think that would mean he would struggle early on, right? He would just struggle early on, but I think that this is a guy, it's different from DeAndre Baker, because I think that DeAndre Baker is a guy who couldn't get out of his own way. He would fall asleep in meetings, stuff like that. We mentioned all that. We've had so many discussions. But then with Caleb Farley, I haven't read any red flags like that. I haven't seen anything about that. I've seen that he took off this year and he focused solely on training and preparing for the draft. That's what I read, that he's been totally dedicated and just training, getting in physical shape, and making sure that he's a better player. And one last thing that I'll say, though, is 6'2", 207 is like kind of freakish for a cornerback. Like, that's kind of a rare size combination with the speed that he has. That's really, like, impressive to me and does make him a very intriguing prospect, especially, like I mentioned, if the Giants trade down, that's what they want to do. I'll be totally happy with Caleb Farley. Yes, at this point, I think number 11 is a little too early, but ask me after his pro day. Maybe my mind will change. Maybe he'll run a 4.25 40, and I'll say, okay, maybe he really does have these elite physical tools that we can mold into being one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL.
That's the big difference, is like if you do run a 4.25, you do run a 4.3 as a cornerback, you are immediately considered a top premium prospect, at least if you have the talents that Farley already has. So I really do agree with you in that sense that the pro day is a big determining factor for him. But what I will say is that I think the Giants won't go with cornerback just because I don't see him as worthy of the 11th overall pick right now, unless his pro day goes exponentially better than anticipated. In addition to that, because the cap is so bad this year, because it's going to drop so much, there is a pretty much consensus that a lot of teams are going to have to shed players to try and get underneath the cap, which means a lot of quality players, especially defensive backs, because there's so many defensive backs in the NFL, a lot of quality players are going to have to get cut, released. So I think that they could probably find a cheaper option, like you mentioned before, a cheaper veteran to hold down the position for the short term, maybe like an Xavier Rhodes type of player that can come fill in and they could sign on a cheap one-year deal just to hold it over, and that way he can turn that one-year deal into a multi-year deal and show that he's like very capable of being a quality player on a good team. And I think the Giants are a couple of pieces away from being pretty competitive, so I could see how guys like, Logan Ryan said he's going to try and recruit players. I could see how that could be beneficial for the Giants this upcoming offseason. But, just to finalize, this topic and kind of, move on from Caleb Farley and onto the other things we have planned for the rest of the week. Do you think that the Giants should go Caleb Farley at 11, or do you think they should just go with a veteran cornerback in the free agency?
Right now, I'm leaning towards veteran corner in free agency and get a young offensive playmaker in the draft. And one of the reasons why is because of Daniel Jones. I think you can make the argument for both sides, right? Daniel Jones would really benefit from having a veteran wide receiver that can kind of help him by just being more advanced at football than he is. But then I also think there's another side of that argument that says if you pair a young wide receiver who's really talented with a young quarterback and they can break out and grow together, well, then the ceiling is just infinitely higher. They can just hit new levels together and maybe just grow throughout their career and just be, a Batman and Robin situation. I think that's a pretty interesting argument, but really overall it just comes down to money, cap space, right? I just think that it's more affordable to get that veteran corner and then get that elite wide receiver in the draft. But I will say this, maybe they get a veteran corner in free agency and then they get an elite talented potential cornerback in round 1. Round 2, I think there's quite a few wide receivers that would actually be able to step in and potentially become a number 1 wide receiver one day for the Giants. Round 2, this wide receiver class is loaded, so don't stress out too much if you don't see the Giants taking a wide receiver in round 1 of a mock draft on the Draft Network on CBS or PFF, because there's a lot of guys in round 2, and I think they're not getting enough recognition. They're not being talked about just enough at this point in the draft process. But it's still early on. We've got a lot of time before the draft is actually here. We've got time before the pro days and all of that stuff. So pro days, everything in between, it's all going to be very determining as to who the Giants decide to take. And then, of course, the draft is going to have a huge implications on what the Giants do. Free agency is going to have implications on the draft. So, to answer your question more concisely, probably not comfortable with Caleb Farley at 11. Definitely comfortable with him in a trade down scenario, and probably would prefer to draft a wide receiver early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this pretty much wraps up this Caleb Farley video. This was just a really interesting mock draft that I stumbled across that I thought would be really interesting for you guys to see and hear about and maybe consider drafting a cornerback with the 11th overall pick. So as always, guys, thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for tuning into Fireside Giants. We're going to be doing all these types of mock draft scenarios and player breakdowns. We're going to do film reviews for Patrick Surtain and also Caleb Farley, so you'll get a good idea of what these kind of players bring to the team. But as always, thank you so much, and we will catch you guys on the next one.